destruction, and many of you will have seen in the last few weeks and months devastating fires and heard about the devastating fires and land clearances that are going on across Indonesia and Malaysia. Many of you have seen pictures like this, which has appeared in The Guardian, and essentially what this fire is all about is clearing large swathes of forested land into using a slash and burn approach because it's very cheap, it's very quick, in order to plant oil palm plantations. And anybody who's been to Indonesia or Malaysia can't help but have seen some of these oil palm plantations. And that, of course, has a devastating effect for the biodiversity that lives in those areas. I make no apologies for these pictures. Of course, the fauna and flora that live in those environments are directly affected by those fires. So why are we having so many fires? These are just some holiday snaps from my recent trip to Borneo. And what you can see is this is the Kanabato River, and literally all day, every day, there are truckloads going up and down the river from oil palm plantations, transporting these fruits, the palm oil. Many of you, well, I hope, have heard about palm oil and what palm oil is and what it's in. But I'm just going to remind you now the diversity of use of palm oil and why we are seeing such major land use changes in places like Indonesia and Malaysia. Because palm oil is literally everywhere. It's not just a biofuel, it's in many, many different food products, and it's in lots of cosmetics and toiletries. In fact, it's actually very hard to find products these days that don't contain palm oil. The reason this is so devastating for gibbons and many of the other Southeast Asian fauna and flora is because 85% of the world's palm oil comes from Indonesia and Malaysia. And it's been estimated that this industry is worth around $44 billion. It's also been estimated that over 50% of Indonesia's rainforests have already been lost. This is just a map that WWF produced of Borneo. And you can see that in the 1950s, Borneo, like many of the islands in Southeast Asia, was completely forested. And in just a very short space of time, in 20 or 30 years, what we can see is that that green area, the forested area, has massively contracted. And it's largely due to oil palm plantations that habitat reduction has occurred. I'm very lucky to be joined tonight by my colleague Susan Chain, and she runs a conservation centre out in central Kalimantan. And I thought it'd be really nice to show you some of the species that she works on. They're literally next door to forest fires, and you can talk to Susan hopefully tonight over a glass of wine, and she can tell you what it's like firsthand working at conservation in regions like this. So this is a really rare primate again. This is Hylobates albivaris, and this is a species that's directly affected by those forest fires. So I thought it'd be nice for you to enjoy this species whilst it still exists. Run Outtrop. You can find more out this particular conservation organisation and many others that we work with through the SSA. If you want to know more, come and speak to myself or Susan or David or Sam at the end of today's session. We'll be happy to talk to you about the sorts of work that we're interested in. So this map gives you, this is an estimate as of very recently, the scale of the problem of these forest fires across Southeast Asia, just the number and the range of fires that are occurring and what effect that is having, you've already heard. But it's not just the biodiversity that are affected, the humans that live in those areas are also being affected. There's massive problems with smoke and smog, and this picture from NASA just shows you the scale of the problem. This is the smoke over Southeast Asia as of about 2 weeks ago. So it really affects a very, very massive area. So this is Borneo here, and here's Sumatra, the sort of southeastern tip of Sumatra here. And as this quote from this weekend's Guardian shows, basically, in the past month, the carbon emission just from those forest fires has surpassed the daily average of the whole of the US economy. So a relatively small region has having a massive effect simply from these forest fires. So it really is a very serious problem. The problem is for gibbons, it's not just habitat destruction that is a cause for concern. Unfortunately, gibbons are particularly susceptible to the illegal pet trade and also to illegal pet trade and the trade in endangered species. So I've already talked about the idea of gibbons being pets. Unfortunately, in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, people will pay a lot of money to have a gibbon as a pet. They actually make very, very poor pets. They don't like being in captivity. They have very sharp teeth. And they certainly don't like being in cages or on ropes or strings and used for tourist attractions. The other big problem in this part of the world is the use of gibbons and other various bits of other biodiversity in food and traditional medicines. So again, this is a common problem for people going into, for poachers and hunters going into habitats and removing often very large numbers of individuals on a daily basis, often systematically going in and removing animals for the purposes of selling, for the pet trade or for traditional medicines. So what does all this have, what effect does all of this have on all the different species? Well, the main effect is massive population reduction for many of the species of gibbon, and some of the numbers here, you don't have to read all of them. But what you can see is that we're really talking about very small numbers for many of the species of gibbon that survive today, often in only the hundreds of individuals, and even for larger populations, they're still persisting at very low numbers. What we also see is that some species are already regionally extirpated, so that means they're actually extinct in some of the regions where they should be found. So, for example, in China, Hylobates lar and the Damascus leucogenes are already extinct in China. And the most worrying of all species for primatologists, and certainly for gibbonologists, is the Hainan gibbon, Damascus hainalis. And that's because it persists at very, very low population numbers. So there's only 25 individuals of this particular species left. And it gives me great pleasure now to invite a special guest star to come and join me on the stage, because my colleague Sam Turvey, here he is, he approached me about 6 years ago. We've been working on gibbons for some years, and he said we really ought to do something about the Hainan gibbon. What should we do? So we got some money together, and we got a PhD student, Jess, right? Where's Jess? And we decided to set about doing some work on the Hainan gibbon. So it gave me great pleasure and very warm thanks to Sam to come and talk about his work in China and the work we've been doing on the Hainan gibbon. So thank you to Sam, and over to you.